Hello, in this video we'll take a look at how you can use the Revolut uh, business API, specifically the business API. Basically the end goal of this is to retrieve the balances, the accounts as such, but that isn't really the main point of this. This is more to show all those complexities in terms of doing the authorization, authentication with Revolut API, which is relatively complicated. Now, to begin with, you'll need to essentially log in or register to the Sandbox Revolut. Uh, Not to make that a very scary proposition, you just need to go to the Sandbox. There are links provided here in the documentation. You can go there, just log in, register essentially with any email you want. You won't need to go through any sort of verification. It will pop up, which may be a bit confusing, but you just go through it and everything is sort of simulated. All the phone numbers, all the filling in of email codes, phone codes, all that is simulated. So you just need to click fill in, skip, and all that sort of stuff. And it will be done automatically. It will be that mock account will be created. So nothing to worry about there. You don't need to register. You don't need to do any kind of verification or anything like that. So that's taken care of. You have your Sandbox account, and now you need to go through the whole gruesome process of actually retrieving all the certificates and signing them and getting the JWT token, which unfortunately in this documentation is not very well documented. You will see that soon enough. We can skip to that part now. They do sort of provide some descriptions to this, although I would say for C# and Visual Studio and Windows, it's not perhaps the best thing in the world. Now, the first step in terms of what you need, you'll need to create a couple of certificates, essentially public certificate and private certificate, the X509 certificates you'll need. For that, just like in this little description in the documentation, you can certainly use OpenSSL and that will be generated. So that will be the first step. You can skip most of this stuff. You can just leave blanks in most of these places. It won't really hurt anything. So you will need this private cert PEM and private cert private cert, and from there you'll need to generate the private key and the PM. So you do have the right away the PM. That's all you need to have, and you need the public certificate as well. So those two files is what you actually need. The public certificate you'll upload to the actual sort of mock example Sandbox environment. That's where it will go in the setup. You will not need to do that in the developer part, right? It's not in the developer part. It is in the actual Sandbox account for the Revolut right here. You have all that stuff. So you will need to find the settings. Quite a bit of stuff here, but essentially you go to your ID, your account, and then you go to APIs. There's merchant API and then there's business API. In this case, we're covering business API, so that's where you'll need to go. Now here, you'll need to upload your certificates. Relatively straightforward thing to do. You name it. You need that URL, URI redirect. This is kind of important. Now, you don't need to essentially have like a live system set up that would give some kind of an answer to a webhook or anything like that, but you do need a URL that will be live because it will actually redirect to that URL and it will give you a code. In the query parameters, it will give you a code which you will actually need to use. You will need to copy it. So that's something to remember. When you copy a certificate, you simply copy the contents, the full contents of that public key. Open that file, open it, copy it. So it's going to be a whole begin, and all that stuff needs to go in there, and then click continue, and then you'll have it. Now, right here, I have this test free. I have my redirect URL, just a website that it will go to, and I'll just sort of grab the code from there for the testing purposes. Now, you will need to repeat this every time you want to use it. We'll get to the tokens later on. Essentially, that's kind of how it goes. You'll need this client ID, and then once it redirects, you'll need to grab the code. I will remove the access now. Click revoke. Once you have it, it will start failing, so you need to do this again and again. That's just how it seems to be. And then we have enable access. So once you click enable access, it will take you to a new page, and then we can go to authorize. Click authorize, just click fill. Very simple, very straightforward. And then we get to a page. Now here in the query parameters, we will get to the code, and we can simply grab the code from here. That code will be needed. It will be needed. So you can write that down somewhere, and then you can move on to the actual code, or rather to the next step of this whole thing. The next step is generating that client assertion, as they call it, the whole JWT token thing. I will just say this: you're dealing with Windows, you're dealing with C#, you're dealing with Visual Studio, and yes, you can do it with a command lines, the PowerShell, and trying to do that stuff. Basically, if you look at the documentation, the step 2, I would say just essentially completely ignore it, except for the JWT payload. So that's something you kind of need to reference. You'll need the URL, you'll need the client ID. The client ID you saw in the business sandbox, right? The business account sandbox. That's where it will be. And that's what you'll need. So just remember these things, what goes into that JWT token, and that's what you need. Everything else you can ignore. We won't use any of these commands. This isn't very useful, and adding to these files it's rather pointless, because C# actually provides all these libraries very conveniently, and you can actually use those instead and get those access tokens, refresh tokens, and deal with it like that. And with that said, let's jump into some code and let's take a look at how that all happens. For this example, we simply have a little console application. It holds a couple of classes and the program.cs where we kind of execute this. This code is available on Patreon. You can download it and use it as great reference. I think it might be extremely useful, as the documentation isn't perhaps all that straightforward. Now, let's get into the credentials manager. We have this one file which sort of holds all the JWT generating and some other stuff as well. The first thing, of course, is to generate that step 2, as they call it, JWT token, which gets rather tricky if you're dealing with all those OpenSSL arrangements, but you can actually just use what you have available in .NET, very similar to what you would do in, say, for example, .NET APIs. You would generate those tokens, all that is provided. Now, just quickly, we can jump into NuGet packages. I'll show you the libraries that we can use to do this a lot easier and make our lives easier. We use, in this case, Microsoft Identity Model tokens, and then System Identity Model tokens JWT. That's what we use, and that is more than enough to handle this whole arrangement. After that, we add some stuff to the token, essentially just generating the expiration. You saw the EXP in that documentation. That was there. The sub part is the client ID. You copy that from that access you gave when you uploaded the certificate. That's where you do it. That's it. And then just your URL where you want things to be redirected, essentially, and the audience as well. So Again, just like any other JWT token that you might have in your own APIs. It's just that the documentation there, again, made things for some reason very complicated and very confusing, but it's really just generating JWT token. The difference from what you might have seen in the past, in your experience, in this case, we're not using a symmetrical key, we're using the RSA security key, and that's where this next part comes in. So essentially what I do here, I read the PEM, private cert, from file. So we do it from file right here. Simple stream reader, you can access it directly, you can do it from file. It really doesn't matter how you do it. You would probably do it from file or get the file somewhere in your service or wherever you're doing this, but you can do it directly as well. Or get it from somewhere from your secure places where we want to hold it in a secure manner. And do be careful of that. It is a secure thing, so you need to keep it securely. Now, after that, we use the system security cryptography, right? System security cryptography, RSA. We need to create this RSA. And then we'll need to have the RSA security key from that RSA certificate, essentially. RSA key, rather. For that, we read the file, we read to end, and then we essentially get rid of all the nasty bits and pieces in that file, in that string that we read from file. So we get rid of the begin RSA private key part and RSA private key part. We also remove the R escapes and N, all those new lines and all that other stuff. We just use replace. In this case, you can use other arrangements as well. But I find that this works. There are libraries and there are other arrangements you can use in C# that are specifically sort of for this kind of handling of a certificate, but it doesn't always seem to work all that well. So I think this way is very straightforward, very simple, and it certainly works quite well. And then from there we go to the RSA now, created RSA. We don't construct the RSA, we create something to remember perhaps. And we use import from PEM. So essentially we take that string, we put it to char array, and we import it to that PEM. And then we simply construct RSA security key, essentially holding that private key, and we will use that to sign the token. The token will be signed, in this case, using this RSA security key. The algorithm, specific algorithm, would be RSA SHA 256. That is a specific algorithm you want to use in this case. You want to provide the signing key and use that algorithm. And once we generate the code, or the token rather, you will see that the header generated is exactly the same as they have in that big and giant, essentially, documentation and overcomplicated documentation. So you'll see it's all exactly the same, and everything else will be exactly the same as they suggest, putting in files and doing all that other stuff. So that's what we have here. And then we generate the token, again, very similar to what you would have in your perhaps API arrangements. You probably wouldn't use this sort of signing arrangement, but maybe you would. So it should be, in general, I think it should be relatively familiar. After that, we have the token handler, just like, again, you would have in probably many APIs. We write the token and we get the string of the token, essentially. This is writing to the line. It doesn't really need to do that, but just for this example is what we have. And then we return the token. So at this point, we have this security token arrangement. However, the token isn't what we use to actually access the data, right? We need that access key. So that's getting to the next step into that documentation. Before going to the next step, you can copy the token, also paste your certificate, or public key rather, and test them. essentially it will try to see if your signature matches the public key. If it does, and this does actually work, I've tried it, it does actually work. So if it doesn't work, that means something is wrong. But with this code example, there shouldn't be anything wrong. If you use something else, it will get a bit more trickier, especially if you do it manually. But personally, I see absolutely no reason of doing it manually when we have all these tools available in C#, and you can whip up a little console application in very little time compared to dealing with this raw stuff and making lots of little mistakes along the way, and then dealing with them for hours and hours. So I think it's a great way to do things here. Also, there is a library available that's not really official one, so I'm not exactly recommending it, but there is something like that available, so you might want to check that out as well. Possibly might work, but there's really no guarantee about it. But yeah, essentially, you test it. If it works, you go to the next step. The next step is a bit of a tricky one. That is where the ID came in. I've already shown you before. You got that access, you got the ID, now it shows you the whole thing with redirects. All we want, you saw already, we redirected to basically a site somewhere, and we got the code. That code is very important because in the next step you need to provide it in order to get the access token. Now with access token, you also get the refresh token. This token, the access token, I believe is available for about 40 minutes. We do state it somewhere in here. Yes, it does. 40 minutes. So yeah, the token will be available for 40 minutes, and then you need to refresh it, which is rather troublesome because the error when it's expired isn't very clear, but there are ways to go around that as well. Now, getting back to this, of course, you always want to use the production arrangement right here. We have it, and we will need the code, which you got, and now we also have the JWT token generated, so we'll just need to provide that and hopefully get the access code and the refresh token as well. In terms of C# code, getting the access token is relatively straightforward once you work out where to actually get the code from and JWT, how to generate that. And then we also need the client ID. So that's essentially the request. It works exactly the same as described in the documentation. You just send this request. It's going to be form URL encoded. Not perhaps the most usual format these days, but it is what they are using here. We have client ID, we have grant type. In this case, now remember, this is a kind of an interesting one. The grant type in this case for retrieving the access token is authorization code. So we put in code, that authorization code that we got before, and that's what we use. We also use client ID, and we provide the JWT token, the original one. Right, that we created. And that original one we will use essentially forever, which is kind of changing the, either retrieving the access token or refreshing it and retrieving a new one essentially with a refresh token. Everything else is like from documentation. Another thing is, you may notice we set the content right here, we set the content for the client, and we have it as form URL encoded content. This is how it's set. You don't need to set the content type for the headers. It's going to be set automatically when you set the content of form URL encoded content. You set that object and you don't need to do anything else. Don't forget that, because if you do set a header for that, it will throw an error. Just something to note. And then we send the content of the whole thing, and then we retrieve the access token. Now, again, this is a nice little example here we have. You already have predefined models for a couple of these things. So we have access token, we have token type, expires in, refresh token. These are relatively simple to generate, but I think it's a nice place to actually get started with. So then we read from JSON. If something goes wrong, we always want to get that content read as string, because we will actually get the error there, right? Otherwise, we'll just get a status which really means absolutely nothing. In this case, it really does mean nothing. So you want to read the content, and you'll get somewhat of a more specific error, though not a terribly great one as well. But at least something, right? So we do get that. We get the access token. We get everything. That's all great and good. Now, once you have the token, you can use the token, you can go ahead and use it. Of course, you want to save it and store it somewhere for the user in the front end, or where you use it. Well, probably your backend would be the front end in this case, but you need to store it, and you need to store the refresh token as well, because later on at some point you won't want to really recreate this arrangement with retrieving the access token again, because every time you retrieve the access token, at least in the sandbox environment, you'll need to essentially recreate the code, which can become rather troublesome, because you need to redirect, you need to retrieve that. So you don't want to do that. You want to keep the access or rather the refresh token around, so you can re-retrieve essentially the access token. And to re-retrieve the access token, you need to provide the client ID. So similar request, actually the same request, the same URL is going to be, but just some different data. Instead of using the code, this right here, authorization code grant type, we are using grant type refresh token. So we're using that grant type, and then we set the refresh token that we retrieved previously with the access token. And then we have JWT provided, as we usually do with these things, right? Always we need to use, for getting the access token, no matter if it's original one or with refresh token, we still need to use JWT. That's how it goes. So we have all this stuff. We can do a little run, take a look at how it all goes. I'm gonna stop it right here somewhere. We'll see. It should work perfectly fine, I believe. So we have that generated, the JWT token. That's all nice and great. We have the sub, so that's all red, perfectly fine. And that's kind of what I wanted to show you. We have RS256. Again, that was added automatically. We didn't need one of those text files and combining text files and merging them. There's no need for that, right? We have a very nice arrangement in C#.net. Everything is ready, everything is predefined, everything is standardized. So it's very difficult to make mistakes. And then in the end, you have signatures as well. And if you want to copy it, you can go, because when you look it up, you go to text, right? It gives you this decoded version. And if you want to check if it actually works with a public certificate in the documentation, where you can actually test it and check it, you do not want to copy this part. This is just a signature, right? If you want to copy that and check it, you go to none. Instead of JWT decode, you go to none, and you copy this part. You paste that, and then you check it. So something to remember, because it's easy to make that mistake as well. Okay, now we can go to the next part, to the token, and check that out. And the token was indeed retrieved. We can take a look at it right here. We have the access token, we have expires in, we have refresh token, and we have a token type. So your usual token stuff, essentially. Then we can use this little token right here. You can copy it, you can save it somewhere. I would suggest, again, with testing it, to save it, because you will need to regenerate the code, and that can be rather annoying, because their Sandbox, just like the real platform, does like to sort of lose its login quite often. That's being 30 seconds or so. which can be relatively annoying, but Revolut is a great system. So if you want to check that out, if you want to join it, they got great benefits for both business and personal. You can use the link below to join that, and also check out the Patreon where this code will be available, and there's lots of free content there for the members as well. Now, going further, we have token, we have new token. That's all great and good. New token is essentially a sort of example of a refresh, but that's not what we need. So if you provide the existing, if you provide the refresh token right here from that token, essentially it will generate a new access token. That's all it does really. I will comment this and just to kind of show you the next part of actually using it. We have these accounts. I'm going to replace this. That was probably still valid, but probably not now. Let's see. We can retrieve the data and we get into these accounts. Now, accounts, you'll get a list of all the accounts for the account as such, right? For whatever was created. So we get a list of all the accounts and you can go through them. You can go through them with link. But doesn't really seem to be any sort of filtering with that, but really, like, it's not a lot of data. You can just get all of it and get the balance, get the search each record by say currency and get the balance. It should be easy enough to do. And I've already predefined a little sort of structure in a C# class for this, so it's very easy to actually do. But getting to the token part, we have, in this case now, we can have a proper HTTP client with none of that form URL encoded, although that's only because we're doing a GET arrangement in this case. And then we have authentication header, bearer token, right? We got a bearer token, so that's what we will provide, our little bearer token. And we will use get async. That token is already there, and then we can retrieve all the data. Again, the important thing here to remember is just the sort of structure of retrieving all this stuff. I will just uncomment this for a bit. Basically, of course, we start with generating the JWT. Once we actually have those certificates and once we have the client ID, you do not need the code to generate JWT. You will, however, need that code, that redirect code that you get through the dashboard, essentially, right, when you grant access. You will need that code to retrieve access token. So you generate JWT first, then you retrieve access token, which requires the code, which you get through the dashboard, then the client ID, which you get through the dashboard as well, and then you provide JWT. Now, the access token can be used to retrieve all kinds of data and post and get and do all that stuff, interact with Revolut business API in many ways. And that is only valid for 40 minutes, so you'll need to use a refresh token right here to refresh it. Now, that's all I have for you in this video. Perhaps there will be some more videos on Revolut APIs and Revolut arrangements. It's a great platform. Do check that out in the link below. And do check out the Patreon, where you can actually download this code and play around with it and try it out, or use it as a reference, or use it fully perhaps in your own application. And with that said, we will conclude this video.